Welcome to Accommodate This. Have you heard these sayings before? Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. Or to thine own self be true. Or don't worry what other people think about you. Or follow your own path. These are all very common sayings we hear all the time. And while they seem good and true on the surface, they are declarations of privilege that we in the autistic community struggle to apply in our own lives. Sometimes the thoughts of others are all it takes for us to become part of the criminal justice system, losing our rights and freedoms, and sometimes even losing our lives. And that's what I need to talk about today. So now that you know why we're here, let's get into the topic for this video: autism and the criminal justice system. I started the script for this video a few weeks ago, and I wasn't ready to record it just yet. However, recent events have forced me to release this sooner than I originally planned, because on Saturday, April 5th, 2025, an autistic teen in Pocatello, Idaho, was shot 9 times by police officers while in his own backyard. The incident took place after police responded to a call to help de-escalate a possible domestic dispute that neighbors described as a drunken man with a knife chasing people around the yard. They speculated that the man was drunk because he kept falling down, and they thought he may have injured himself with the knife. The witness who called for police support was hoping the police would de-escalate the situation and capture the shooting and preceding events on his mobile phone. The teen was transported to the hospital, where they were forced to amputate the lower half of his left leg. And soon after, he slipped into a coma that lasted for several days. And he was declared brain dead by the following Friday. And they pulled the plug the next day, Saturday, April 12th. Despite witness testimony, the knife-wielding man was actually a 17-year-old autistic boy named Victor Perez, who also suffered from cerebral palsy and intellectual impairments. Now, he wasn't drunk, but he struggled to walk because of his disabilities. While police claim that the boy was not responding to their demands, the video clearly shows the police were ignoring the other people in the vicinity, who were shouting and motioning to wait and not shoot. Despite it being protocol to use non-lethal options, and despite the police officers being armed with tasers and pepper spray, they opened fire within 12 seconds of arriving on the scene. They never once asked what was going on, nor did they take appropriate steps to de-escalate the situation. They claimed to not know the teen was autistic, and they were more concerned about the safety of the other 2 people in the yard getting hurt from the knife. And yet, that didn't stop the police from putting those people in the line of fire. The entire situation is tragic and was completely avoidable. While the young man was holding a knife, police were not using minimal force to de-escalate or even to disarm him. They used extreme force. The parents of the boy claimed they could have calmed the boy down, but the police triggered the boy, who was already mid-meltdown. Police claim that they didn't know the boy was autistic, which not only should have changed the way that they handled the situation, but would have also explained the lack of response from the boy. While in meltdown, autistic people may be barely coherent. We may not respond to verbal communication. Our sight and other senses may be dulled because of overstimulation. It can feel like we are in a fog with a whirlwind of emotions taking over. It's scary and traumatizing, but mostly it is uncomfortable. And the fact that the boy was also minimally verbal, he would not have been able to respond verbally even if he was calm. Now, I decided not to show the video, but I did link it in the description below. I also watched it several times myself. And while Idaho police claim that the camera angle captured in the video was only one limited perspective, and that it would have missed other things going on, there's still quite a bit you can see in the video. For instance, you could see the boy was sitting on the grass, having a meltdown for most of the video. To me, it looked like he wanted to be left alone. Of course, his parents were concerned he might hurt himself or someone else because he was holding a knife, and that explains his mother's actions, where it appears she was attempting to retrieve the knife from the boy's left hand. However, one of the first rules of a meltdown is to give the autistic person space. The second rule is to help them feel safe, which includes reducing stimuli. And yet we see in the video that the mother kept touching him in attempts to grab the knife. And when she would touch him or grab his clothes, he waved the knife around as if gesturing for her to stay back. At one point, it looked like he was tired of repeating himself as he spoke some inaudible words while pounding the ground with the same hand holding the knife. He wasn't hitting a person. He was hitting the ground. Later, the mother is shown trying to knock the knife loose using the handle of a broom, which resembled a sort of sword fight. I'm not sure using a broom handle for that was an effective strategy, but it happened. And none of this shows he was interested in actually hurting anyone. He just wanted to be left alone. But there's more. You can also see two of their neighbors in the video. One was an African American man who casually strolled by in the background, and at one point he shook his head as if he found the entire situation ridiculous. The other neighbor was a child seen playing in the background. But when the police arrived on the scene, you can see a man who I assume is the father, calmly leaning on the fence, waving them over in his direction, very casually. He didn't wave emphatically or with urgency, and he didn't signal toward the boy. He calmly waved for the cops to come to him for information or an explanation. If there was any real danger, a reasonable person may have expected him to point to the danger, not direct the cops over to himself. None of this points to a hostile or dangerous situation. And yet, without reading the room, so to speak, police went straight toward the boy. You can see both the man on the fence and the mother held up their hands to signal not to shoot, begging the cops to stay back. Within 12 seconds of arriving on the scene, police opened fire on the boy as soon as he stood up. This is one of many examples of autistics who are in distress being misinterpreted as dangerous. Too often, those with the power to help are less inclined to look at the facts of a situation and are quick to respond to stories and their emotions. As in the case of Victor, the neighbor who called the cops described him as a drunk man who was stumbling and fell to the ground. What looked like a drunken man was actually an autistic teenager with cerebral palsy. The caller also described the boy as a man with a knife, chasing people around the yard. Again, that's more story. There are typically two reasons for using a knife as a weapon. One, to cause harm, or two, for self-defense. And the caller, likely erring on the side of caution, assumed it was offensive and the other people in the yard were in danger. Although the caller claims his intention was to have the cops de-escalate the issue, no questions were asked and no level of verification was attempted other than emotional validation through misinterpretation. As an autistic man, I watched the video and I see a fellow autistic in distress who just wanted to be left alone for a bit so he could calm down, but nobody would leave him alone. When in meltdown, autistics can feel quite defensive because we perceive threats that others don't, that they don't detect or even realize are there. It can be so distressing and overwhelming that we may lose the ability to make rational decisions. Based on video footage of the incident, it looked to me like he was defending himself, though officers claim it looked different from their angle. Still, talking with him or the other people in the yard might have proven fruitful for determining the facts of the situation, considering everyone else seemed rather calm before guns were firing. Instead, the cops fired 9 times into the boy's body. 9 gunshots for disarming a person with a knife. And people wonder why autistics feel so threatened in society. We don't communicate or interact with the world in a neurotypical way. Too often, autistic individuals are subjected to mistreatment from the majority because of misunderstandings and faulty conclusions based on confused perceptions. Whether those misunderstandings are on our part or not, the autistic person is often punished either way. And this holds true in the criminal justice system as well. While I don't want to cause any more fear, I don't want to wash over it either. Autistic people have every reason to fear the perceptions of others because those perceptions are frequently used against us. Autistics are seen as less trustworthy simply because we are different and misunderstood. And this makes us more vulnerable to criminal accusations, which can be punished through extreme measures without due process. Despite how innocent we may be, we are still at the mercy of the biased perceptions of the majority and the whims of the ignorant. Studies show that autistics are no more likely to commit crimes than anyone else, yet we are 7 times more likely to become caught up in the criminal justice system. Sometimes that's because we are victims ourselves. In fact, in the rare event that an autistic person does commit a crime, it's usually because of deceit or coercion from others who take advantage of our social deficits. For example, misunderstanding of social cues. The desire to have friends has led some autistic people to be befriended by criminals and become their unwitting accomplices. Autistic people often don't understand other people's motives or social cues. For example, many autistic people have difficulties with eye contact, which may be avoided, fleeting, prolonged, or considered inappropriate. This may be interpreted as intimidating or alarming, which may lead some people to report us as dangerous when that couldn't be further from the truth. Difficulty with change or unexpected events. An unexpected change in the environment or routine, such as a public transportation delay, may cause great anxiety and distress for the autistic person, leading to behavior that is perceived as aggressive by others. But instead of recognizing our distress and providing comfort, people usually interpret our behavior as dangerous and they retaliate with aggression. Rigid adherence to rules. Ironically, our rigid adherence to rules may land us in trouble because of how irritated we may become when we witness other people breaking the rules. We have a strong sense of justice, which makes it difficult for us to stay silent in the presence of injustice. Not understanding the implications of our behavior. Well, without proper support and intervention, an autistic person might not be able to predict the consequences of their actions or learn from past experience. This is typically the case when an autistic person also has an intellectual impairment, like the boy from Pocatello. However, many autistics have no intellectual impairments, We simply don't understand unspoken rules and have different instincts that make us stand out from the majority, making us easy targets. With that said, studies show that when an autistic individual has been incarcerated for a crime, the likelihood that they will commit a crime again is less than 1%. That's the lowest rate of recidivism or repeat offense out of any other incarcerated population. And yet, autistics are 7 times more likely to get wrapped up in the criminal justice system than aulistics, often as victims of a crime. In fact, the prevalence of autistics as victims is so high, a unique term has been coined to describe it: mate crimes. This term is a play on words mirroring hate crimes because of the targeting associated with it. But mate crimes are appropriately named not only because of their similarities to hate crimes, but also because they tend to be committed by people who first befriend the autistic individual and then exploit that relationship with often devastating results. And once we are in the system, our rights and needs are often disregarded, resulting in a torturous experience compared to our neurotypical counterparts. It's becoming more critical that we address these violations of human rights in our criminal justice system. Unfortunately, at this point, we don't know how many autistic people are wrongfully killed or imprisoned in the United States because the current federal criminal legal system makes little or no attempt to survey or track who is or isn't autistic. They also make no attempt to understand the autistic population or to recognize our needs, supports, and challenges. Criminal prosecutions tend to ignore criminal intent and unfairly hold autistics to what is known as the reasonable person standard, which completely disregards developmental disabilities altogether. This standard may even be applied when it is clear that our disability played a major role. According to the courts, a reasonable person is characterized as someone who obeys the law, does not put themselves or others in danger, and minimizes danger or risk when it is avoidable. The reasonable person standard is a biased concept, a legal fiction from 19th century English law, used to determine if defendants used an ordinary level of caution, care, and consideration. Basically, in 1837, the case of Vaughan v. Menlove created the standard to determine that a reasonable person would not have stacked hay in a dangerous manner next to a neighbor's structure because of the risk of fire. You may think the obvious hole in this concept is that everyone has a different idea of what is reasonable, making it a completely subjective concept. But in 1905, in McGuire v. Western Morning News, the court clarified that the standard is objective rather than subjective. Therefore, the specific knowledge of the defendant doesn't matter. All that matters is what a reasonable person should have known and done. Such an approach has disastrous consequences for the neurodivergent, who have different brains and therefore different instincts, different ways of thinking and reasoning, different struggles, and different sets of values and ideals. There are only a handful of disabilities that the law recognizes as legitimate and worthy of accommodations, including intellectual and developmental disabilities. However, since there is no screening for these in the criminal justice system, and the reasonable person standard is more often applied by neurotypical jurors, accommodations can be so insufficient that many disabled people are abandoned once criminalized. Prosecution of autistic individuals often leads to disastrous consequences for children and their families without any benefit to the public. And we are subjected to suffering unnecessary cruelty under an inadequate and inequitable criminal justice system that attempts to punish or incarcerate us for behaviors that are simply manifestations of a developmental disability. Autism is a lifelong disability which affects how people communicate and interact with the world. All autistic people have difficulties with communication and social interaction. Many autistic people also have sensory issues with noise, smells, bright lights, and so on, which can be painful and distressing. And we can experience intense anxiety and extreme unease around unexpected change. Our behavior may appear odd and can sometimes draw unnecessary attention, but in general, autism is a hidden disability, and it may not be immediately obvious to other people that we have a disability. When that's the case, expectations may be higher than they should be, resulting in misjudgment of our behaviors. Too often, the immediate reaction of others may be that the autistic person is dangerous. And so, society reacts with aggression toward the autistic person who is most likely in distress. A more appropriate approach would be to first consider if the person may be autistic, and then to treat them as you would treat any other vulnerable person in a stressful situation. I understand it can be difficult to tell if someone is autistic. After all, every autistic person is different. Many autistic people may be unaware that they are autistic. Others may choose not to disclose their autism. But it is not okay to retaliate against a person simply because they displayed behavioral and social differences, and you decided to assume the worst. I get that it may be an immediate reaction or reflex to assume the worst, but that makes it worse. If you didn't give it a second thought, isn't that precisely the opposite of a reasonable person? The reasonable person standard applies to all of us, not just the person you want to see punished for making you uncomfortable. Don't confuse your reaction with the truth. I'm not saying we shouldn't trust law enforcement or witnesses. I believe we need both, and the more honest they are, the better. But I am saying they are human beings, and therefore capable of making mistakes. Too often we put law enforcement on a pedestal because of the power that they wield. But might does not make right. And yet what tends to happen is they double down on their overreaction rather than admitting they may have misinterpreted the situation. They assert their position beyond reason. They trust their own senses more than they honor the truth. And no matter how flawed our senses can be at assessing the truth of a situation, that doesn't make it any easier to accept doubt. It doesn't make it easier to give others the benefit of doubt when they assert our interpretation might be wrong. Egos, overconfidence, and experiences all play a role. And too often, because the majority of interactions people have are with neurotypical people, interactions with an autistic person is an outlier that throws people for a loop. Our mere existence challenges norms and how people believe society works, and when they witness differences, nature favors those who err on the side of caution. And the possibility of misinterpreting a situation increases with a person's unfamiliarity of differences. Now, I've researched several websites designed to inform law enforcement and the public about autistic characteristics to reduce the likelihood of jumping to conclusions. While it is admirable that they would attempt to shed light on the topic, I found they were severely lacking anything more than a superficial understanding of our different behaviors. So what are some of the reasons an autistic person may be behaving differently? The following are characteristics that experts claim are identifiable characteristics of autistic people. An autistic person may show unusual or no eye contact. But the reason for this is because we listen with our ears, not our eyes. We don't depend on body language and gestures the same way as aulistics. And the appropriate amount of eye contact is rarely ever taught, making it an uncomfortable ritual that feels very unnatural and intrusive to us. Autistic people may struggle to understand you, and this implies that there's some sort of intellectual impairment, but that's not always going to be the case. Many autistics have auditory processing issues. It may take us more time to absorb and work through information that is presented to us verbally. We may need to ask several clarifying questions because we understand how easy it is to misinterpret another person. And if you add pressure for us to respond quickly, that can make it harder for us, adding to our distress. And if we are already in a meltdown, we may not have enough control of our faculties to respond. Autistic people may find it difficult to talk to you because our condition makes communication difficult. We struggle to understand social cues, body language, tone, sarcasm, and figurative language. We are very literal, tend to think in pictures, have different ways of associating concepts with one another, and at times may be unable to speak. Many autistics are non-speaking, but others who can speak under regular circumstances may still struggle to speak in high-stress situations, a condition known as selective mutism or situational mutism. We may use other means of communication, such as gestures, repeating phrases, or making sounds instead of words. Autistic people may repeat what you or another person says because we struggle to communicate. We may repeat what we hear in an effort to either connect, show we are listening, or to express a thought when we don't have our own words to say what we need. For instance, repeating a sentence may be our way of indicating that was triggering for us, or that we don't understand and need clarification, or that we do understand but don't know the proper response you're looking for. We may even repeat what we hear in order to assist our own brains in processing the information due to having an auditory processing issue. Autistic people tend to speak honestly, even to the point of bluntness or rudeness, but this is because we tend to be literal thinkers and direct speakers. We don't understand the amount of flowery speech that is required for a given social situation. We may ignore social norms that don't make sense to us or that slow us down. Many of the rules of social discourse seem arbitrary and superfluous, and therefore irrelevant to our message. This is not an intention to be rude, but rather an intention to be as clear as possible by leaving out all unnecessary information that would only serve to muddy the waters. An autistic person may seem unusually anxious, agitated, or even scared of you. And that's because we are often victims of abuse. We are often mistreated by others who insist on us behaving like them without ever providing an explanation or instruction for how to do so. We have different brains and different instincts. What may seem normal to you may seem quite bizarre to us and vice versa. But too often, because we are in the minority, we are the ones blamed for misunderstandings. And so when situations escalate, the likelihood of us being blamed increases, which adds to our stress. Yes, we may seem scared of you, because in the past we've been blamed for any misunderstanding, whether it's on our part or not. We feel under-equipped in most social interactions, and our experiences teach us that the majority is unsafe. Autistic people may display repetitive, obsessive-type behavior, and this is because we are attempting to soothe our stress. Many repetitive behaviors, known as stims, are self-soothing behaviors that regulate our nervous systems. Much like someone might count to 10 before speaking, we may need to move a certain way, make a particular sound, complete a specific ritual, or so on, in order to calm ourselves. These may become more erratic when situations become more stressful. Autistic people may show sensitivity to sound, light, or touch. This is because our nervous systems developed differently. This results in us being oversensitive or undersensitive to different stimuli, Our senses may cause us distress, discomfort, or even pain. A simple touch may feel like we are being burned or cut, while a tight grip may help us feel more secure. Our sensory differences don't have to make sense to you to be respected, but they are often disregarded in the criminal justice system, which turns a blind eye to our suffering. Autistic people may seem not to realize the consequences of what they may have done, because rules are often not explained to us. The world runs on neurotypical rules that are intuitive and feel natural to the majority of society. However, autistics make up only 3% of society, and very little makes sense to us. We are often misunderstood, probably more than we misunderstand. And yet, the fault is always put onto us? And yet we are very reasonable and willing to accept rules that are clearly explained to us. But if they are not explained, we may struggle to understand their importance. This doesn't mean we willfully disregard laws that we don't like. It means there may be laws that don't make sense to us because they seem counterintuitive, arbitrary, or harmful to us. And when our needs and values are devalued so often, it's difficult for us to value systemic rules that so often result in harm to us. I don't want to dilute your understanding. There are dangerous autistic people, just like there are dangerous non-autistic people. And many of us autistics are guilty of autistic rage, which is admittedly a pretty pointed anger response. Many of us may also result to self-harm or violence. But this does not mean that all of us are dangerous or violent. Every autistic person is different. We all have different triggers and tolerance levels. While violence is rarely justified, the fact that people automatically assume we are dangerous because of behavioral differences is also rarely justified. Completely disregarding what led to the behavior or what contributed to our distress and rebranding our distress as violence, these are dishonest approaches. These are irrational responses to uncomfortable situations. And despite how much fear we may be experiencing, fear shared by the majority often overrules our own. We are outnumbered, our condition is stigmatized, and facts are so misunderstood that we are automatically disadvantaged in the criminal justice system. In fact, we are considered a vulnerable class of people, which should afford us accommodations. But in reality, we are rarely given accommodation and are often held to unrealistic standards that punish the innocent more often than not. One false belief about autism is that autistic people are intellectually impaired. However, being autistic does not automatically mean the person has an intellectual impairment. We may have normal patterns of speech, a normal or exceptional vocabulary, and even normal or exceptional levels of intelligence. But we do have differences in how we communicate. It's part of the diagnostic criteria. Even so, we may experience extreme fear when being put in handcuffs. Some experts say the autistic person may experience fear when being handcuffed because we don't understand what's happening. And this can be true, but there could be several other reasons for our fear that have nothing to do with our understanding of the situation. Our sensory differences may mean we experience pain at the sensation of the cuffs on our skin. Combine that with the other stimuli likely occurring, such as sirens, flashing lights, clear aggression against us, and sudden loss of our ability to speak and communicate because of sensory overload. Overload can lead to a meltdown, which may appear as a tantrum or emotional outburst. And sometimes it can lead to a shutdown, which is an internalized meltdown. Both are involuntary reactions to over or under stimulation. And at times we may end up in a dissociative state where we are barely conscious. Our ability to communicate may be greatly hindered when our hands are bound, making it more difficult for us to respond to questions or demands coming our way. In other words, there are many reasons why an autistic person may struggle to communicate, and even in low-stress situations, we struggle to communicate. Just imagine how much harder it is for us when the pressure is on. And because of our communication differences, many autistics find themselves providing false confessions of crimes they didn't commit. Although the law allows for accommodations when the person is identified as autistic, many people do not realize they are autistic. And many people who know are hesitant to disclose their diagnosis because of stigma. Plus, asking if someone is autistic is not part of the standard protocol when detaining someone for criminal activity. One study showed that only 39% of autistic defendants ever disclosed their diagnosis to police. And because of that, they're not afforded the adjustments that would have made their situation less dire. Even though laws afford us the right to a reasonable accommodation, there's no standard for providing accommodations, so they are often dismissed. One study showed that only 25% of autistic defendants were given reasonable adjustments despite their known vulnerability. And the impact of the entire criminal process has been shown to be significantly worse for an autistic person's mental health than neurotypicals. Autistics are already 9 times more likely to commit suicide. Once imprisoned, suicidal tendencies skyrocket to 20 times more likely compared to the general population. This puts autistics in the category of a high-risk population. Yet it has been reported that 80% of law enforcement could not identify key characteristics of autism and did not treat 48% of autistic criminals as part of a vulnerable population, and 52% being deemed as not equipped to work with autistic individuals. Roughly 59% of court officials and 46% of judges spoke or behaved in ways that suggest they did not have an accurate understanding of autism. This was confirmed by several other studies in multiple countries. 2 studies showed judges believed high-functioning autistics were predisposed to committing crimes and lacked impulse control, among other negative, misrepresentative stereotypes. And when a case was tried by a jury, the jury was informed the defendants were autistic about half of the time, but no explanation of what that meant was ever provided. These trends indicate a need for autism awareness training, both to help law enforcement and legal professionals on how to identify autism. However, studies show high percentages of criminal justice professionals already received autism awareness training and still showed a lack of understanding. This was attributed to ineffective, minimal, or vague training courses. Experts say to remain calm and not treat the autistic person like a criminal, which is completely unlikely to happen. If someone is accused of a crime, law enforcement is going to be as aggressive and uncaring as they believe they can justify. They believe they are doing the right thing because they believe the person they are detaining is a criminal who has broken the law, and it is their duty to stop them. So while it would be ideal to treat us with more compassion, the likelihood of that happening is slim to none. The law enforcement officers are concerned about their own safety and the safety of others. People die when they give people the benefit of the doubt. So the compassionate approach, though ideal, is irrationally naive. It assumes that law enforcement are withholding judgment and not acting quickly, the opposite of what they are trained to do. Our law enforcement officers are trained and encouraged to be reactionary because emotional restraint and hesitation to act can get people killed. Apparently, so can being reactionary. So that can't be the issue. Experts on this topic live in a different reality from the cogs in the criminal justice system. Experts advocate for mercy, understanding, logical reasoning, and compassion. The criminal justice system holds subjective ideals and norms as objective standards. They ignore neurological differences. They treat unusual behaviors as crimes, assume guilt until proven innocent for the greater good, and they absolve themselves of their mistakes under the guise that they have the best interests of society in mind. Minorities be damned. There are steps that we can take as autistics to help if we are ever in a questionable situation. Here are some ideas I gathered from the autistic community. Show your hands to the police without holding anything in them. This is a known sign that you are disarmed and are not a threat. Stay still. Don't try to run away, stand up, get closer, or move at all unless they ask you to. They will assume any of your movements are an attack and will do whatever they can to protect themselves and others, so just stay still. No touching. Avoid any touching or getting in their immediate space if possible. They will take it as aggression. Follow orders if you can. Some of you may not be able to speak, but it's okay to just sit still and quiet. Otherwise, if they say stand up, you stand up. If they say turn around, you turn around. Follow their orders the best that you can. If possible, tell them you are autistic. Or carry something that shows you are neurodivergent. For example, an ID card, bracelet, keychain tag, or maybe even a lanyard, like the ones that have the sunflower on them. Something quick that says, I might not respond how you expect. It shouldn't be necessary, but it might just give someone pause. Many people use a sunflower lanyard to indicate they are autistic, though until now, you wouldn't have expected to need it in your own backyard. Make a meltdown or crisis plan and share it with the people around you. Include what helps, what hurts, who to call instead of police. Some of us can't communicate clearly in those moments, so having that plan ahead of time could help someone else speak for you. Practice police interactions if that's something that you or your autistic loved one can tolerate. Even just understanding what might happen can help. But again, meltdowns don't care about preparation, so don't blame yourself if things go sideways. And lastly, if you are of voting age, vote for representatives and initiatives that will ensure your safety and needs are considered. Keep speaking out. Demand training for your representatives and accountability and change. The cops in the Pocatello shooting did several things wrong, which led to the unfortunate shooting of an autistic boy. So what are some things that they should have done? Let's talk about some strategies for law enforcement. Reduce stimuli. Switch off loud sirens and bright flashing lights. Many autistics have sensory sensitivities to lights, sounds, touch, etc., which can worsen our anxiety and make it harder to hear instructions. Do not shout at the autistic person, and if possible, avoid touching them. Keep calm and remain non-threatening. Autistic people can often sense anxiety in other people, which in turn can make them more anxious. Approach the autistic person in a non-threatening way and keep facial expressions and gestures to a minimum. We need to feel safe in order to calm down. Give the autistic person some space. Autistic people may not understand personal space. We may need more personal space than other people, or we may invade your personal space. Give clear, slow, and direct instructions, using their name if you know it. For example, Jack, get out of the car. Avoid using vague language, sarcasm, metaphors, and irony. An autistic person may take what you say literally. Explain clearly what is happening and what you are doing. Use visual information. Autistic people will often understand better if you use visual information. So use visual supports to explain what is happening, or if they can read, put it in writing. Be aware that they may simply repeat back the questions they were asked. If asked a yes or no question, they may repeat back the first or last word said with no understanding of the question. Try asking a series of yes or no questions to determine the style and dependability of the response, and then follow this up with the key yes or no questions you need an answer to. Allow the autistic person time to process information, and don't expect an immediate response to instructions. Check that the autistic person might have any injuries, but do it in as a non-invasive way as possible. They may not be able to communicate if they are in pain. Recognize a meltdown when it's happening. Not every behavior is aggression. Some things are sensory overload. Some things are trauma responses. Do not try to stop the autistic person from flapping or from other repetitive movements, as this can sometimes be a self-calming strategy and may subside once they understand what is happening. Here are some of the signs of a meltdown. Outward displays of distress, mood swings, expression of frustration or anger, rapid breathing, sweating, shaking, or trembling, hitting, kicking, or biting, excessive or intense stimming. These are those repetitive behaviors I spoke of that you don't want to try to stop them from doing, because it will actually calm them down if they can do them. They may also zone out or dissociate, making it very difficult for them to understand what's going on or to respond to your commands. They may try to run away. This behavior is called eloping, and it's very common for neurodivergent people who are in a meltdown to want to get themselves to safety. Listen to people who are saying, "He's autistic, he's not trying to hurt anyone." Stop ignoring the people who know what's actually happening. And bring in trained professionals. Cops should not be the first and only responders for everything. If the autistic person is detained, law enforcement should keep in mind that an interview may be extremely difficult for everyone involved. This is due to the difficulties autistic people have with communication and social interaction. The autistic person may appear very able, with a good or even exceptional vocabulary, and there may be no reason for an interviewing police officer to suspect that the interviewee requires additional help. However, the officer may later find that they receive blunt answers, the subject is changed, or the individual is reluctant to make direct eye contact. The literal way in which an autistic person might interpret language can often lead to them giving incorrect answers or becoming anxious. All these things should be considered before reaching an assumption of guilt. Adjustments may be necessary, considering some of the interview techniques used by suspect interviewers could inadvertently elicit false confessions from an autistic person. If you've gotten this far in the video, thank you so much for your support. I hope you find the information I've shared useful and helpful. My hope is that this information might help keep more people safe. If law enforcement had better information ahead of time and listened to those in the yard and just paused for a moment before acting, Victor Perez might still be alive today. Law enforcement needs to be more careful, less extreme, and do better to protect the public without the use of excessive force. We need law enforcement to be less reactive and more responsive. What's the difference? Reactions are immediate and don't have much thought, but a response can be thought out and tactful. While I don't want to upset anyone, it is reasonable for you to feel angry at this moment. Pocatello law enforcement were clearly wrong and are now trying to lie their way out of taking responsibility for their mistakes. But we need to get angry, and we need to voice that anger to the city council offices where we live. We have over 800,000 law enforcement officers in the United States, and they are failing the autistic community. We need to let them know that we are terrified, that we don't feel protected by law enforcement, and we need them to take the necessary steps to learn more about autism, our struggles, and our needs. We have just as much right to exist, just as much right to our autonomy, and should not be scared to be in our own backyards. Stay safe, and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, and subscribe to see more content like this, or click on the video here to continue watching.